Welcome to The Free Will Show, a podcast that provides a beginner-friendly introduction to free will while also exploring cutting-edge developments on the topic. I'm Taylor Sear.
And I'm Matt Flummer. In this episode, we talk with Susan Wolf about her view of free will, which she calls the reason view, and how her view has evolved over the years.
Thanks for listening. I'm happy to introduce Susan Wolf. Edna J. Curry, a distinguished professor emerita at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Susan's well known for a variety of work in value theory. In my own case, I read her papers on moral saints and on the meaning of life as an undergraduate. She's also well known for her work on free will and moral responsibility in particular, having published a book called Freedom Within Reason with Oxford University Press in 1990, and having written several articles on these issues over the years. She's also recently been to Oxford to give Locke lectures, which some of that material is on free will and moral responsibility. And we're looking forward to asking her about that, in addition to talking about some of her earlier work on free will and responsibility today. So thank you so much for joining us, Susan. Could you start by telling us a bit about yourself, your work, and how you came to be interested in working on issues related to free will?
Sure. I mean, in some ways, you've told the basic professional facts about myself. I went to college as a math major and sort of found myself at the intersection of math and philosophy.
Oh, cool.
And have just sort of lived taken a very straight path since then, from college to grad school to teaching to never leaving teaching, basically. Mm-hmm. As you've already said, I work on a lot of topics in ethics, mm-hmm. broadly construed, especially topics having to do with moral responsibility and mm-hmm. freedom, and topics having to do with the relation between moral and non-moral values. So the limits of morality, the relation of meaning in life to morality, mm-hmm. Stuff like that. So those are probably my main professional preoccupations.
Sure.
Yeah. Unprofessionally, I love movies and novels and food and hiking.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I share a lot of those interests. Do you have a favorite movie?
Well, my favorite movie is The Philadelphia Story, which is, a golden Hollywood, movie from 1939. It being my favorite, it was my mother's favorite. I watched it, I've watched it all my life. I have written an essay on it, actually, but...
that's awesome.
Yeah, but, there's so many movies I love.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, you are well known for defending a view of free will and moral responsibility that is sometimes called the reason view. So could you take a minute to just say what you take free will to be and then how it's related to reason?
Sure. I realized I forgot to answer. How did I get interested in free will?
Oh, yeah, sure. We can go back to that.
Well, in some ways, I think it's one of these things that people who are interested in, philosophical questions generally get interested in easily and quickly. So I don't even remember, when it struck me first that it could just be an illusion that we're responsible for what we do, that we deserve credit and blame for what we do. Mm-hmm. And that seemed both upsetting and amazing. And so I wanted to pursue it. But then, and as I said, I think that's a pretty common thing. But somehow I got the impression from the people around me in college or graduate school or both, that it wasn't a question philosophers talked about anymore, that it had already been answered. Determinism was no threat. And if you only someone very naive would still worry about that. Same thing was true about the meaning of life, as a matter of fact, one of my other big subjects. That you don't talk about that. That's not professional. That's not sophisticated. And then when I was in graduate school, I took a seminar from Thomas Nagel, one of the great philosophers of our time. Mm-hmm. And he just didn't have that attitude. He thought, this is one of the timeless, incredible questions. Right. He didn't have that attitude to meaning of life either. It somehow gave me, pardon the expression, the freedom to explore this question that I thought was so important, but that I, somehow was pushed aside from what was the philosophical mainstream of the time. Anyway, that's, I think, how I then thought, wow, this is great. I can really work on it. And
Yeah.
so that's
so cool.
Yeah,
that's
very cool.
the answer to that question. What do I mean by free will? What I mean usually is whatever freedom is necessary in order for us to be responsible agents, in order for us to, whatever freedom would be required in order for it to actually be true that, what we do and what we decide and who we are is, up to us in a way that justifies attitudes like pride and shame and praise and blame and that whole variety. That's what I mean by it. So I think some people understand free will to be, by definition, a certain metaphysical status, not causally determined by anything. And then the question is whether you need free will for anything. I start with thinking, look, freedom, when we talk about free will, we assume that it's something valuable. What would it be valuable for? I guess the initial assumption, and at least one aspect of why it would be valuable, is so that we can be responsible, if you think that's a good thing, which I do. And then the question is, what kind of freedom do you need for that? So for me, free will goes that way.
Yeah.
As to the connection with reason, my view is that the freedom you need for that, this is just the answer to that question, is that you have the ability to govern your actions or behavior by your values, and the ability to govern or determine your values by the reasons there are for having one set of values rather than another. So it's sort of, you need the ability to see the vision. The metaphor of vision is probably as good as the metaphor of reason, right? To see the truth, not only about descriptive facts, but about values. And if you have the ability to do that, then you're responsible for whether you actually do it or not.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks. Well, you're also well known for having an asymmetrical view where the conditions for praiseworthiness are different from the conditions for blameworthiness. Could you explain that asymmetrical aspect of your view and why you go for that sort of view?
Sure. And I appreciated your calling it an asymmetrical aspect of my view, because even though for someone who thinks the question is free will, well, let me back up. My view is asymmetrical in respect to the question, when is freedom compatible with determinism, in such a way that if you do the right thing for the right reasons, then even if you're determined to do the right thing for the right reasons, that doesn't undermine your being responsible, praiseworthy for what you did. If you do the wrong thing, which by definition can't be for the right reasons because it's the wrong thing, then you can only deserve blame if you have the ability to do the right thing in a way that at least some kinds of determinism would seem to undermine. So the idea was, if you're completely determined to do the wrong thing, that was the idea, at least in the initial description of the view. If you're completely determined to do something wrong, then you're not responsible for it. But if you're completely determined to do something right, you might be responsible for it if the path for determinism goes through right reason. As I said, I appreciated your calling it an aspect of my view, because it seems like a very striking and implausible fact if you think the question about free will is it compatible with determinism
Right.
or not? It's like either it is or it isn't, and it won't be sometimes. But the reason view that I was just talking about is the view that, look, what you need for free will is the ability to act in accordance with reasons. And that's an ability that you necessarily have if you do the right thing for the right reasons. So the question of determinism kind of drops out of that. Like,
Right.
if it's possible to be determined to have the right thing for the right reasons, then you could be determined and responsible. But at least when I wrote my view initially, it seemed to me it's not possible to be determined to do the wrong thing, and also have the ability to see that it's wrong and control your actions. So that's where the asymmetry comes from.
Right.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
So suppose that a mad scientist implants a chip in your brain that sees all the chip is able to recognize what reasons there are, or however the details work out. And I mean, I'm just basically describing a manipulation case where somebody's manipulated to see the reasons that they were existing and then act according to those reasons. And if it wasn't for the manipulation, they wouldn't have acted in this way. So what kind of response do you typically take when it comes to manipulation cases that are designed to meet the criteria of recognizing the reason and acting according to the reason?
So let me just get it clearer. We have somebody who, if it weren't for the manipulator, wouldn't steal the wallet that was in the purse of the person who left the table for a minute. Okay. And now we have a manipulator who does what?
So they trigger whatever kind of device that they have that allows the person to see some reason that they have for not doing that thing, and then
wait for not doing it. I mean, you mean for stealing?
Oh, I was trying to come up with one where they were determined to do the right thing.
Oh, okay. So here was somebody who was going to steal. He was going to, this woman leaves her purse on the table while she goes to the restroom or something. And he says, he's about to grab the wallet out of the purse.
And the manipulator brings the salient moral reasons to light that he wouldn't have considered otherwise. And then he sees, oh yeah, that's actually a good reason. And then he also ensures that the person acts according to that reason. Okay.
So, right. So here the woman has just left for the restroom, and suddenly a thought appears in this guy's head. Stealing is wrong or something like that. Right? And so he doesn't steal. Is that what you're suggesting?
Sure. Yeah. We can go for that one.
I guess I don't think that is sufficiently robust to count as the right reason for not stealing. That is, it seems to me in that case, his own reason, his own faculty of reason, his own, psychological personality, self, if you like, is being short-circuited by the manipulator, even if it's short-circuited by way of, putting a thought, stealing is wrong, or, that doesn't belong to you, in which then generates the thought. It's just too small, too, so that just doesn't strike me as what the right way of thinking of doing the right reasons in a way that would be responsible. So it's not so much that he's determined that that keeps him from being responsible. It's that he's, determined in this sort of flat, crude way. As a hypnotist, if you hypnotize someone to say, you're going to open the window as soon as the clock chimes, you're going to open the window, or you're going to get hot and therefore open the window, right? I guess I just feel like you're really leaving the person's self behind. It's not so much a question of determinism, but a question of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Straightforward.
Could I ask about one variant of the case? I'm imagining, a parent with an adult child who doesn't have a good moral character, and the parent really wants for their child to be a better person. And so, the parent finds some moral exemplar and hires the right team of neuroscientists and psychologists to copy the exemplar's values and how they see the world, what reasons they see for action, and sort of implant them into their child's mind, so to speak. So, delete the bad character, paste the good character in there, and then I don't know, it's a little far fetched, but it's a thought experiment. But yeah, so maybe this isn't possible. That would be an interesting response. But if it were possible to do this, and the adult child then saw the right reasons for doing the right things and then acted virtuously afterwards. I mean, maybe I've contradicted myself in describing the case, but I wonder what you would say about that.
Right. Well, good. I'm not. Before I say, I don't know what to say about that exact far-fetched example. I mean, because what you're talking about is kind of just switching the wiring in somebody's brain.
Mm-hmm.
At one moment they have the brain that they've developed and, has, gone through experiences and reflection and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden you're rewiring it so that it's got a completely different personality, or at least a significantly different personality. Sure. And you're asking about responsibility for that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, without wanting to go into the metaphysics of personal identity, you wonder, is that even the child we were talking about anymore? That it's the same body, but it's very close to, the Prince and the Cobbler kind of experiment, experiment that Locke came up with. So on the one hand, I think, well, that case, it's really hard to put into context here. However, as soon as you started talking about it, I thought, well, though my answer to Matt was, look, in the case in which you just manipulate someone to have, a thought at a moment that generates an action at, in the next moment, that doesn't seem to me to be what, in the spirit of the reason view that says, look, doing the right thing for the right reasons is what you need to be praiseworthy, right?
Yeah.
For whether you're determined or not, it doesn't matter. The fact is, we could well be determined. I mean, whether it's an adult child or a young child, parents do, and forget the neuroscientists. Parents do try to model and show, they teach their children lessons, they read their children books that, they go to certain kinds of schools or churches or whatever. They do try to model behavior and educate children to develop the values that they think are good values.
Yeah.
And if all goes well, if the parents are right, that their values are good values, and the children get these models and have the intelligence to reflect on them and so on, that is how you become a virtuous person. So
it's just happening overnight instead of throughout childhood.
Well, I don't think it can happen overnight because reason isn't just, one thought after another. It's not, reason involves understanding and, a kind of flexibility about, what's. So I guess when I was thinking, what are the right reasons for not stealing somebody's wallet? What are the right reasons for telling the truth? We can give a sentence or two, but that sentence or two isn't going to actually assure that a person could memorize that sentence. A person who's got a very kind of rigid ability, or even an AI kind of being with a very rigid ability to sort of store information could say, stealing is wrong, or my parents get mad if I steal, so I won't steal. That's not somebody who actually understands yet what's wrong with stealing. I think to understand that you have to go through, you have to think about what it would, what would it feel like to me if someone, if I come back and see that my wallet is gone, what would it, you sort of relate it to other things and see whether it coheres with other values. All of that stuff is part of the reasons that eventually add up to virtue or the absence of virtue. And so the kind of, and I guess I think once you've got that, whether it's determined or there are indeterministic aspects to it is less relevant than whether you actually do have a virtue or just some very rigid and thin idea that I should tell the truth or I should tell the lie or something.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hopefully we're not going to get tired of talking about manipulation cases. Are you familiar with Al Mealy's zygote argument?
No.
The idea is to, instead of having a manipulation that happens at one moment and then the action takes place shortly after, you make a larger time gap in between the manipulation and the action that takes place. So his idea was, well, what if you had like some kind of god or goddess who engineers a zygote and implants it into a specific person, and with their knowledge of the laws of their deterministic universe and the state of the universe at that particular time, the way that they engineer the zygote, they can ensure that this person is going to develop into like an ideally self-controlled person, and in 30 years they're going to perform action A. And if we say, well, this is a praiseworthy action, and throughout the process the manipulator has ensured that they have gone through the right kind of process that you were just trying to explain, or they're learning through everything, and then complete that action 30 years later, do you think that this changes anything for your view about whether this person is praiseworthy for if it's a good action and they did it for the right reasons?
I guess I'm a little bit confused. What exactly does the zygote do?
So the way he sets the case up is that the manipulator, in Mealy's case, it's a goddess named Diana, who is aware enough of the laws of nature and the state of the universe.
Right.
It's a deterministic universe, that she can ensure that if she arranges the atoms in just the right way,
right,
and plants it into the specific person at just the right time, that she can ensure that this person is going to develop into an ideally self-controlled agent who performs a specific action 30 years later.
For specific reasons.
Yeah.
And they're good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And is she ensuring, and they're not just reasons like thoughts that are, I was complaining before that just having the belief, stealing is wrong, or, you should respect private property or whatever. That's not a reason. You have to do all the reflection and.
Yeah, she goes through the whole process. She's got good parents, good schools.
By putting things up this way, right? Then I don't know why you're calling her a manipulator.
Okay.
It sounds fine to me.
That makes sense given what you said about the way that parents educate their children. And we don't call them manipulators.
Yeah, he actually says that instead of calling it a manipulation case, because the agent doesn't exist at the time that Diana's doing all her finagling.
Yep.
So you call it original design or whatever you want to call it.
Right, exactly.
It's something different now.
Right. Well, I know you've already done a season on foreknowledge, but I when I was starting out thinking about these topics, I had also been reading Leibniz, who, and in ways I couldn't even recall completely. I had this idea that, one thing that's famous about Leibniz is that he believed God creates the best of all possible worlds. And I thought, look, this could be Diana here, that, you're thinking, look, I want to create a world in which we have virtuous people doing virtuous things for the right reasons. So when he sets it up so that that's what's going to emerge, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't make anyone have a thought. He doesn't make anyone have a, decide to do something. He kind of sets it up and releases it so that we develop into having the thoughts. I mean, in some sense, you could say he makes us have a thought, but take the thought that 3 + 7 = 10, right? Now, how do I have? I do believe that 3 + 7 = 10. Why do I believe that? Well, I learned arithmetic in whatever grade people did. I got A's when I put down 10. 3 + 7. I can actually do all kinds of additions, many additions. As I said, I actually became a math major in college. So you could say God made me do that. That's true. If God, created everything about the world, or released a world in which he, it was determined that I would learn that 3 + 7 = 10. But I mean, that's another case. Am I manipulated to believing it, or just, I learned how to add, and that's where it comes from. And I don't, I feel like, well, I get whatever credit you should get for being able to add correctly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's just a very thin case that seems to me analogous to, Diana making a virtuous person.
Nice.
Do you disagree with this? I mean, feel free to push back.
Well, my view is very similar to yours, so
yeah,
I'm nodding along.
It sounds like the thing that you should say if you're defending.
I should say my views. Yeah. But I want to say what I should say.
We'll stop.
In the search for truth.
Right. The true things for the right reasons.
Right.
That's funny.
Are there any other objections that you've come across that you think that kind of make you have pause, and you're like, oh yeah, actually, that's a really good objection. I need to think about what I need to say about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't answer that. Well, one answer is no. There are no really good objections. That is, when I hear of objections, I have not, at least I haven't recognized myself as having to worry about, changing my view. Mm-hmm. I haven't changed my view, at least in conscious ways, in answer to objections. Partly, I should admit, I don't read as much philosophy as maybe I should, as much as a lot of people do. I certainly don't read. Unless someone sends me something saying I wrote this objection, would you read it? I might not even know that it's out there. Mm-hmm. However, there was, years ago, Gary Watson wrote. He wrote a review of the book, did an author makes critics. So I have my views are in a book. Yeah. They're also in some articles, but they're in a book called Freedom Within Reason. And he wrote up a response to it that was in an APA session. And that became an article called Two Faces of Responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's a really difficult article. Mm-hmm. But it was written initially as a response, or the early version was just, criticizing my view. At the time I first read it, not just his pre-article, but the article itself, I didn't understand the article, and I certainly didn't understand why he thought it was a criticism of my view. It didn't. I just couldn't. I didn't get it at all. Over the years, and there have been a lot of years, I have thought a lot about that article, and I think my views, I wouldn't want to say have changed in the sense that I've taken them back, but have evolved in ways that are deeply indebted to that article. So it was written as a criticism of my views. I don't know if that's really fair. I think maybe he didn't understand my views. I think he didn't fully understand the very large things he was saying. I mean, it's very complicated, or at least I understand them in a way that he didn't, I think, write them initially. Mm-hmm. But it's a great article that has changed the way I think about freedom and responsibility and reason a lot. Not, as I say, by switching views so much as by making it more nuanced and complicated, and adding in a lot of it's as if the bare bones of my view are the same, but there's a lot of flesh on it that comes from that article, which was at least initially a criticism. And so in that sense, I've been really moved by it, but it would be hard to explain it very quickly.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll come back to that in a minute because we want to ask you about how your views have evolved or at least shifted or been tweaked along the way. But I mentioned the Locke lectures earlier at Oxford, some on freedom and responsibility. I'm sure that this is something that many of our listeners would be really interested to hear about, and Matt and I would too. So could you give us maybe just a preview of some of the material from those lectures that's on freedom and responsibility?
Sure. I mean, and these things are all, I mean, the question of how my views have changed, what's in the Locke lectures, and how has Gary Watson's ideas on two faces of responsibility changed, those are all of a piece. So, so they really are continuous questions. So the Locke lectures as a whole, there are 5 lectures. It's a 5-lecture series, and the whole series is called Selves Like Us. There is a question, what is it to be, well, you could say, what is it to be distinctively human? Which is also the title of the first of the lectures. And I'm understanding the question, what is it to be a self like us, as synonymous with that. It's important to realize that neither of those questions are meant to be questions about our species. I mean, it's not what is it to be a Homo sapien, but what is it to be the kind of being we can relate to in this robust way, have interpersonal relationships with of a certain robust kind. I don't know if any of your previous episodes have talked about Strawson's famous article, Freedom and Resentment.
Yeah, here and
talks
there.
About, he makes a contrast between treating an individual with a participant stance and treating them with an objective stance. To treat an individual with an objective stance is to see them as, someone who could be an object of treatment or training, someone you could avoid or even or enjoy, but not reason with. He says, actually, not and the question of what kind of and he associates the contrast between objective stance and participant stance with the contrast between a responsible agent and a non-responsible agent. Participant stance and responsibility go together for him. So I guess the Locke lectures are that I'm asking the question, what is it to be that kind of being that it's appropriate to take the participant stance for, that it's appropriate to have reactive attitudes like resentment, indignation, pride, admiration for, that it's appropriate to regard as a responsible agent. That's all connected with the idea of the distinctively human to me, or the, being a self like us. The interesting thing is, historically, when we talk about what is it to be distinctively human, to be a self like us, to be, in a word that's pretty familiar in contemporary philosophy, a person,
right?
In Peter Singer's idea of person, Locke's idea of person even, the dominant feature that's been stressed has been rational agency. Right? Yeah. And surely that is relevant to being a self like us, and relevant to being a responsible agent. You would think someone who has something called the reason view would think, that's the right answer. But in these lectures, I say, look, I can see why someone whose focus is on contrasting human beings with other non-human animals might think, well, it's our rational agency that distinguishes us. Now we've got AI, right? Now we've got, and a wealth of science fictional images of extraterrestrials. I mean, we've always had also God and the angels, other rational beings. But anyway, so there are lots of rational agents that we can think about, from AI to extraterrestrials to, maybe this is a slightly different kind of case, psychopaths, do we want to call those selves like us? Are those beings that we can have the participant stance towards?
Mm-hmm.
Or that we should have the participant stance towards? Not obvious to me that the answer is yes. In fact, my inclination is to say the answer is no. You don't, that doesn't mean that you couldn't possibly develop AIs that would become selves like us, but it's not guaranteed. Just being rational isn't enough. So, right. So the Locke lectures are, the central idea is to encourage us to think a little bit more about what it is to be a self like us, to whom we can take participant attitudes, to whom we can regard as responsible in the robust sense, which involves feeling indignation, resentment, admiration, gratitude, stuff like that. And to argue and to see how things change when you de-emphasize the role of rational agency, the powers of rational deliberation and control, and bring in something more or other that distinguishes us not only from, turtles or whales even, I guess, but from AIs and, certain kinds of extraterrestrials, maybe, that have no empathy and stuff like that. Right. So, and I think one of the things that changes is the idea of what responsibility is. So, the lectures, they talk some just about what it is to be a self like us. The second lecture is on something called aesthetic responsibility, which mainly takes off from the idea that being a self like us involves having the capacity to be sensitive to beauty and to create aesthetically interesting things. So to be appreciative and creative of those things is something that's an AI might not have, that I think other animals, including ones who do paint, elephants paint, but they, I don't think there's like a self behind their painting that, that expresses itself in a way. So, right. So I take that as an example. The third lecture is on character and what is it to have a character, where again, the idea is it's not enough to say you have reason. It's not even enough to say you have values, if values are the sort of thing that a manipulator can just implant in you, right? So what I was talking about in the earlier part of the show about, look, reason, doing the right thing for the right reasons is not just a matter of, I have a correct thought that moves me to a correct action. It's having something more robust, a kind of intelligence and understanding, the capacity for insight. So, a person who's honest is not just someone who has programmed in them the do not tell a lie psychological law, but rather has some idea of the importance of truth in human relations, knows what it feels like to be lied to, has some sense. I'm not going to give you a full account of any of it, but someone who understands, and that's not just something that can be programmed so directly, but that evolves over time, is sort of subject to feedback from experience and reflection. And right. So I think that's the way my views on free will and my views about the reason view, it's the same in that I think, look, what you need is the ability to, to get the right values for the right reasons and then act according to them. It's just that I've come to see or to think that understanding what's involved in having the right reasons is important in ways that I didn't appreciate, and I certainly didn't talk about in the earlier work. So it'd be nice to be able to have a full account of what it is to have the right reasons like that. I don't really have a full account. I have this idea, the phrase I keep coming back to is active intelligence. You need an active intelligence, which includes faculties of reason, but also perception, empathy, imagination, all these faculties together, that is active in the sense that you go through life and you're processing experiences, thoughts, ideas over time, so that, views you have deepen or get revised or change. It's being that kind of person, being that kind of being, that I think makes us potential objects of responsibility, along with all these other things that I,
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks for that. Yeah.
That is very interesting. Will that be published in a monograph?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah, cool.
I'll have to do some revising, I think, before that. But.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Susan. This has been excellent. It's been great to hear about especially your recent work, but how it's changed over the years too. For listeners who want to read some of your work or follow what you're doing now, where can people go to follow your work?
Well, I'm sorry to say I am really a creature of the previous century. I don't have, I don't put my work on any particular website. So I think I have a more or less up-to-date CV online under University of North Carolina Philosophy Department. Mm-hmm. So you could find what work there is, but it's not all easily available to pull up. So, some of it, I guess, is on philosophy. Is available because I get emails from academia, saying someone has recently read this. It's like, well, I don't know where they've read it from. But unfortunately, I can't tell. I have some books out. I should have more books out if I just got the energy to write the introductions for them. The Locke lectures will come out probably in a couple of years. So I can only say keep looking.
Keep looking. Yeah, that's great. We'll link to that the UNC website with the link to the CV too, so people can find it easily. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks.
In our next episode, our guest will be John Mayer, therapist and academic philosopher based in Cambridge, Massachusetts.